Shalom Aleichem, and I hope that you had a wonderful Rosh Hashanah, and that the Tainus today isn't going so difficult either. My name is Rabbi Adam Dubin. I work here in the RCA office, and I am the founding rabbi of Keser Shem Tov in Passaic, New Jersey. I wanted to just speak a little bit about the Parsha this week, Parshat Vayelech. Oftentimes it gets kind of the short shrift because most people think about the Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur related to as Shabbos Shuvah to the Haftorah, which is amazing and is very important and is certainly worth a lot of effort put into it. But the Parsha is important too. For the story. In the days during the communist era in the Soviet Union, there lived a Jew, a Pashto Yid named Rav Mendel Futterfass. Rav Mendel repeatedly put his life at risk with efforts to promote Yiddishkeit education behind the Iron Curtain. And for about 14 years or so, he was sentenced to prison in a labor camp for the crime of teaching Torah. Now, while he was in the Siberian Gulag, he spent most of his free time, whatever free time there was, learning and davening. But he also interacted with and conversed with other prisoners, some of them Jewish and many of them not. Among these other prisoners was a circus performer whose claim to fame was that he was an incredible tightrope walker. Rav Mendel would often engage this man in conversation, having never himself been to a circus. Rav Mendel was really baffled by this man's profession. How could a person risk his life walking on a rope several stories above the ground? And remember, these were days before there were safety nets. To just go out there on the rope, what's the point? What do you do it? The performer explained that due to his training and his skill, he didn't need to be held up by any cables, and so for him, it was no longer dangerous. Rav Mendel remained skeptical and intrigued. After Stalin died, the prison authorities relaxed some of their rules a little bit, and the guards told the prisoners that they would be allowed to stage a makeshift circus on May Day. There was no doubt that the famous tightrope walker would have his act, and that would be the highlight of the show. And the tightrope walker wanted to make sure that Rav Mendel was in the audience. Everyone watched with bated breath as the tightrope walker climbed up the tall pole to the suspended rope. His first steps were timid and tentative. After all, it had been several years. But within a few seconds, it all came back to him. With his hands twirling around, he virtually glided across the rope to the pole on the other end. And then, in a flash, made a fast turn, reversed his direction, and proceeded back to the other side. Along the way, he performed several stunts, and the crowd went wild. When he was done, he slid down the pole, he took a bow, and went running straight to Rav Mendel. "So," he asked, "did you see that I wasn't held up by any cables?" Very impressed, Rav Mendel said, "Yes, you're right. No cables." "Okay, you're a smart man," the performer said. "Tell me, how did I do it? Was it my hands? Was it my feet? What was it?" Mendel paused for a moment. He closed his eyes and replayed the entire act back in his mind. Finally, he said, "It's all in your eyes. During the entire time, your eyes were completely focused and riveted on the opposite pole." Astonished by Rav Mendel's ability to see this, the performer said, "Exactly. When you see the destination in front of you, you don't take your eyes off it. Then your feet go where they need to go, and you don't fall." The tightrope walker had one more question for Rav Mendel. "What would you say is the most difficult part?" Again, Rav Mendel thought for a moment and said, the most difficult part was the turn, when you had to change direction. The acrobat said, correct again. During that split second, when you lose sight of the first pole and the other pole hasn't yet come into view, there is some real danger there. But if you don't allow yourself to get confused and distracted during this transition, your eyes will find that pole and your balance will be there. This week's Parsha, we learn about the events that transpired on the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life here on earth. And the Parsha is called Vayelech, and Moshe went. The Mefarshim point out that even on the very last day of Moshe's life, he was on the move, walking forward, achieving, and growing, making the most of every precious moment of his life. Moshe Rabbeinu's message to us is that so long as we have breath of life in us, there ought to be Vayelech, explorations of new horizons, new journeys, going to new frontiers. How do we walk this tightrope of life without stumbling? The answer is by establishing clear and proper goals and remaining focused on those goals like a laser beam. The Torah provides us with a roadmap to a meaningful and fulfilling way of life. It sets goals and it defines purpose. It's also noteworthy that this reading is mentioned, is read on Shabbos Shuvah. On this Shabbos, as I mentioned at the outset, we read the Haftorah that says the words of Shuvah Yisrael, that the Navi exhorts us, pleading with us, beckoning with us to improve the quality of our lives, to even change direction if we need to. When you know that what the purpose of your life and what the destination is, and you don't take your eyes off that pole, then you know where to put your feet. Even when things turn, and we momentarily lose sight of that pole, we don't need to despair. Shabbos Shuvah teaches us that a change of direction doesn't need to send us plummeting. On the contrary, we can and we should shift gracefully with the changes of our circumstances, catch our balance, and let the next pole come into view. By doing so, as we live our lives, continue doing what the will of Hashem is, may we merit to speedily see a full and complete redemption, a return to Eretz Yisrael, the Beis Hamikdash, that Yom Kippur this year is turned from the tightness that it is, and a day where we are like the Malachim, to being a day where we are truly Malachim. Amen.